Hey guys, Antoine Martel here, and I believe that buying a home is probably the worst investment decision that you could make. And I've dealt with it firsthand because when my family moved from Canada to the US, my parents ended up buying a home and it was a terrible investment. You heard that right, it was the worst investment. And when my parents came from Canada to the USA, they thought that that's what everybody had to do and that's what everybody did. That everybody came to the USA to live the American dream, and part of that American dream was buying a home to live it. After owning that property for 20 years, my parents ended up selling that property, taking the cash and investing it in real estate. They realized that buying that single family house was not part of the American dream. Instead, they can take that money from their house, invest it, and live for free. Now, I'm sure you've heard people say that renting a property is a complete waste of money. You should really take that money, buy a house, and grow your equity because all the mortgage payments you make will just grow your equity over time. But trust me, I've experienced it firsthand. The banks and the home builders are both trying to sell you a product so you can live that American dream. So throughout the rest of the video, I'm gonna share with you why I believe that renting a house is way better than going and buying a property. But before we get into the video, please make sure to like and subscribe to my channel because my goal with this channel is to help all of you go out there and invest in real estate and buy your first rental property before the end of the year. Now this may surprise you, but the total cost of home ownership tends to be higher than renting, even though your mortgage payment may be lower than the rent. And I'm gonna share with you guys different points about why I believe buying a house doesn't make sense financially, and there's way better ways to go out there and invest your money instead of using it as a down payment to buy your primary residence. First of all, single family houses were built as a product. So the bank, when they get more and more money deposited, they have so much money that they're able to lend out. And back in the 1960s and 50s, they didn't really have a product to lend out the amount of money that they were able to legally lend out. So that's when they got connected with home builders and started building these homes, building suburbia, to give out these loans so that they can make the interest payments every single month from millions and millions and millions of Americans. And the whole marketing scheme around it was called the American Dream. This whole American Dream is just a marketing strategy by banks and by home builders to sell you a product, and it was a perfectly well executed marketing strategy. So by you going out there and buying a primary residence, you are falling right into their trap. The banks are trying to get as many deposits as they can get in because they're able to lend that out on a multiple, and normally it's a 9 times multiple. The banks really want you to come and make deposits with them so they can lend the money right back to you so you can go and buy your primary residence. So isn't it crazy that when you go and get a loan from the bank to buy your primary residence, that's your own money. Your own money in deposits that the bank got a 9 times multiple from the federal government to legally lend out. That's your money that they're giving back to you and charging you interest on top of it. Now, it's not just about the story of the American dream not being real, it's about the numbers and the math that comes with it. So the first reason why I believe you should not be buying a house and you should be renting is because it keeps you stuck in one location. So with the way the world is moving, with everything going virtual, it doesn't really make sense for you to go out and buy a property because you may get a job offer across the country, or you may get a virtual job offer where you don't even need to go into an office. Being stuck in one location also doesn't make sense as your family begins to grow, because you may go and buy a starter house with you and your wife, but then once you start having kids, you may need to have a bigger house, then you have to sell that property, go buy another property, and every transaction along the way, you're putting money back in the bank's hands, and you have to pay a realtor and all the transaction costs that come along with it. So the average homeowner only stays in their property, their primary residence, for less than 5 years. Now, what's the problem with this? The problem is that when you go and buy this property, when you get a loan on this property, normally the first 13 years are just complete interest payments. There's no principal pay down, you're not growing your equity, none of that is happening when you buy that personal residence. So if you take the average American family that goes and buys a property, they get a loan, they live in that primary residence, and then within 3 to 4 years, they leave that property and go and move and buy another property, those 3 to 5 years of mortgage payments are completely going to the bank. The big deal breaker for me when going and buying a primary residence is the amount of capital that it takes to buy that property and the amount of capital that it locks up. That's the reason why I'm never going to buy a primary residence. Instead of taking your $60,000 or $100,000 or even $500,000 and using it as a down payment to go and buy your primary residence, what would happen if you took that money, invested it, took the cash flow from that, and then used that to pay for your rent and live completely free? And I know that it's possible because my parents have done it. My parents bought a house in 2001, sold it 20 years later, took the equity in their home and used that to invest in real estate out of state, took the cash flow, and now they're able to live wherever they want to and pay rent and live completely free. Now, people really think there's only 2 options: buying a house and renting a property live-in. But there's actually a third option that many people overlook. And I believe that third option is taking your cash, buying assets and living off of those assets and the cash flow that those assets produce for you. And by doing this third strategy, you're getting all the benefits of going and buying a home, buying an asset. You get the appreciation, the principal pay down, and all that kind of stuff, except other people are paying down your loan for you. You don't have to go keep working at a job, keep making your money, and then using that money to pay the bank back. Instead, other people are going to work for you, and they're coming back home, paying their rent, and you're using that rent to pay off the mortgage. Even if you just buy a house for $250,000 and you put 20% down plus closing costs, you're going to be all in for that property for $60,000. Now your mortgage payment on that property is going to be close to $1,000 a month. Instead of taking your $60,000 and just buying one primary residence, what you can do instead is take your $60,000, go out of state, buy 3 rental properties. Each rental property will make you $300 to $400 a month, making you close to $1,000 a month. Now you can take that $1,000 a month and go live wherever you want to, and take your $1,000 a month you're making in passive income to go and rent wherever you want to live. A lot of people believe that going out and buying a primary residence, they get the appreciation and the equity buildup over time, which is completely true. All real estate appreciates. And if we assume that all real estate appreciates, why wouldn't you want to buy more and more assets and more real estate? So if you took that same $60,000 and you bought a couple rental properties out of state, not only are you getting the appreciation, but you're also getting a cash flow return on your money. Whereas if you took your $60,000 and bought a primary residence, you're not getting any kind of cash flow every single month from that property. You're only getting the appreciation. And even beyond the amount of money that you have to sleep on every single night by buying a primary residence, there's even more costs associated with buying a house that many people forget about. When people are out there buying their primary residence, they just look at the principal and interest payments. They just look at their total mortgage payment every single month, and then they compare that to the rent amount. But what they forget to include in the numbers is the amount of repairs that are gonna come up over the years. Whereas a rental, all of that is encompassing in the rent amount. You don't have to pay for any of those repairs. So when you go and buy a primary residence versus going out and renting a property, let's say the HVAC explodes and you have to go and fix and replace the HVAC. If you're a renter of that unit, of that condo, of that apartment, of that house, you can just call your landlord or property management company and they'll send somebody out the next day to come and fix that HVAC unit at no cost to you. You just keep making your rent payments every single month like nothing ever happened. But now let's say that you own that property and you live in that property. Now you have to call an HVAC company, you have to get 3 quotes, you have to find somebody that does good work, you have to manage and maintain that repair, you have to make sure they do it correctly, and you're gonna have to fork out $5,000 to $10,000 of your own personal cash. Now the average American family has less than $50,000 in savings. So let's say that family owned a primary residence and their roof goes out and their HVAC goes out at the same time. Now the roof alone is gonna cost at least $10,000 and the HVAC unit can cost another $5,000 to $10,000. So that can be close to $20,000 in repairs that they're gonna have to pay for. Now many families don't even have this amount of money in savings and they can't even probably complete these repairs. They're probably gonna have to wait months to go and make these repairs to make their house in livable condition again. Or they would have to get some really sharky loans to get money immediately to be able to fix these repairs so they don't have water dripping into their kitchen every single night. Now again, when you take your cash and go and buy rental properties, many real estate investors incorporate vacancy and maintenance items in their numbers. So even if you're looking at taking your cash and investing it into real estate, that number and that cash flow is all encompassing with repairs over the length of the loan over the time that you would actually own that property. So not only do people not include repairs and maintenance that may come up when they go and buy a primary residence, people also overestimate the amount of appreciation that a home may have over the length of the loan. And they do this by a lot. Some people even buy a house just for the appreciation factor because they feel like they want to get their money out of their bank, get it into a house, they want to make mortgage payments to themselves, they want to own this house, and then they think that their house is going to appreciate by 10 or 20% year over year because it has in the past. In the last 3 to 5 years, homes have appreciated that much and they think that's going to continue. So they want to go and buy a primary residence to bank on that appreciation that they think is coming. But they're wrong because over the last 30 years, homes have not appreciated as much as you may think. Yes, maybe in the last 10 years after the Great Recession, homes have appreciated a ton. But if you look at a longer horizon, a 30, 40, 50-year horizon, homes have not appreciated 10 or 15 or even 20% over that long period of time. Homes have really only appreciated by maybe 5 to 8%. Take, for example, my own family. So my family bought a house in San Francisco in 2001 for $750,000. And when we moved from Canada, we were living in a $200,000 duplex, and we bought this $750,000 house in the San Francisco Bay Area. And to even buy that house, my parents thought it was absolutely ridiculous that they were buying a single family house for $750,000. But almost 20 years later, my parents sold that house for $2.1 million. The house that they thought was crazy to buy for $750,000, they ended up selling it for $2.1 million, which is absolutely ridiculous. But if you look at it over a 20-year period and you look at the amount of tax you have to pay when you sell that property, the realtor fees, all the other costs associated with selling the property, the ROI is only 7%. And when you sell a primary residence, the first $500,000 that you make in profit is completely tax-free, but anything after that is going to be a long-term capital gains tax, which is taxed at 25%. So for us to go and sell that property, we had to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars in taxes to the government to even be able to sell that property. So when you include everything, you include the taxes, the realtor fees, we only made a 7% return on our money for that 20-year period. And that was in San Francisco, a place that was very highly appreciating. In California, where people buy houses all day long, just banking on the appreciation. But trust me, we did it. We went out, bought a house, and we only made a 7% return on our money for 20 years. There's way better investments you can make to go and put your money down to make a way higher return and not have to sell it and pay 25% of those earnings to the federal government. Now, a lot of you may be saying, well, Antoine, why did you guys sell it? You should have just refinanced the property. Well, there's a reason why we couldn't do that. Because we bought the house for $750,000 and now it was worth over $2 million, we went to the bank and tried to refinance the property. And the bank told us that we couldn't refinance the property because we didn't have the income to support it. So literally the house that my family was living in, we couldn't even afford on paper to go and refinance with the bank. So our only option was to either hold the property the long run and just keep paying off the mortgage, or to sell the property, take the cash, and go rent for the rest of our lives. And the benefit of refinancing, if we could have done it, is that all that money we would have taken would have been a loan, and loans are completely tax-free. So it would have been perfect if we could have just refinanced the property and pulled the cash out, but it just wasn't a possibility. So for you, when you go out and try to buy a primary residence and you're banking on that house, that $1 million house being worth $50 million later, you have to have the income to support that $50 million house when you go and try to refinance that property. For that reason, a lot of people are not able to refinance their property. They're either forced to sell or forced to stay in the house that they bought many years ago. So now that we talked about home ownership and why home ownership is not the best strategy, I'm going to talk about renting and why I believe renting for you is a way better alternative. So what would happen if you choose to rent instead of buy? The most important thing that you can do when you rent a property instead of buying a property is you can take that down payment and all the money that you were going to use to buy that primary residence. You can take all that cash and invest it into assets. Buy single family home rental properties, buy apartment buildings, take all that cash flow every single month and use that cash flow to live off of. Or to grow your investments and make more money, because now you'll have your job, which is paying you a monthly salary, and you'll also have all these investment properties making you monthly income as well. And you can take that cash and continue to buy more and more assets. And this is the most important point of it all. Even people like Gary Vaynerchuk and Grant Cardone have all talked about not wanting to buy properties. They don't want to tie up their cash in buying these super expensive houses. They would rather just rent properties, take their cash, invest their cash wisely, and be able to be fluid and live wherever they want to. Another great thing about renting is that you can go wherever you want to, and you can move to whatever city you want to in a very quick amount of time. So for example, I live currently in Los Angeles and I have an apartment here in Los Angeles, but let's say I had a fantastic opportunity in Miami or New York City. I can just tell my property management company that I want to cancel my lease, give them a 30-day notice, and I can move to whatever city I want to and be there in 30 days. But if I bought a property and I didn't like my neighbors, or I didn't like the street I was living on after a couple of years, or it was just too noisy and I wanted to move, now it's a whole process. There's a lot more work involved when it comes to owning a property and having to move. It's a lot more complicated. There's a lot more moving parts. And let's say you have to move and your property didn't appreciate, right? So let's say the property value stayed the same or even the property value go down. You're going to be losing money because you're going to have to pay 60% to the realtor, staging fees, closing costs, loan payoff, all those kinds of things. So you're actually going to be losing money from buying your primary residence if you have to move. In the most populated cities across America, which are typically the most expensive cities, it doesn't really make sense to buy a house. It makes more sense to rent in those big populated cities and invest in real estate across the country in smaller tertiary markets. The benefit of investing in the tertiary markets is you can get a very similar rent amount when the property value is way, way less. That all goes back to the rent to value ratio and why investing in the Midwest is a great place to invest, because the property values are low, but the rents are relatively high due to the property values. So for example, for me personally, I live in Los Angeles and I live in an apartment. But if I wanted to buy a single family house in Los Angeles, that house would cost me around $1 million. I would have to put down 20%, which is $200,000. Then I would have to pay for all the closing costs. So all in, it would cost me around $250,000 to buy a home to live in Los Angeles. Then the mortgage payments every single month would be right around $4,000 every single month for the next 30 years on that primary residence. But instead, what I did is I took my $250,000, I went to tertiary markets in the Midwest and I bought 10 single family home rental properties. Each rental property makes me around $300 every single month, which is close to $3,000 a month every single month. Then I take that $3,000 a month and I use that to pay for rent at a luxury apartment in Los Angeles. So the next time you have a parent or a grandparent or a friend or a family member tell you that don't rent a property, go buy a property, you're just throwing money away, I hope that this video showed you why I believe you should be renting instead of going out there and buying a house. Your cash is your jet fuel to get to the next level. So use that cash to go and invest in assets that produce an income, and use that income to go out there and either buy more assets or to live the lifestyle that you want to live. But don't take all that jet fuel and put it under your bed every single night and buy a house to live in, which is only going to appreciate by 5 to 7% in the long run. Thank you so much for staying till the end of the video. I hope that you enjoyed this one. Please like and subscribe to my channel, because I hope that every single week as I keep launching these videos, you guys are going to get closer and closer and closer to buying your first real estate property.